All right, it's that time again. Time for our First at Home Sunday School lesson. This week is going to be for June 28th, Sunday, June 28th, and the title of the lesson is Jesus Heals a Man Born Blind. And that pretty much gives away the plot of the lesson as well. It's from John chapter 9. We have 3 points this week. Jesus came to be the light in the darkness, John 9, 1 through 7. Jesus came to do the works of God, John 9, 29 through 33. And Jesus came to confront spiritual blindness, John 9, 35 through 41. So in this case, we're going to see the story of Jesus healing a man born blind. And this is one of kind of an unusual case that we'll see in Jesus' healing practices. This is Jesus healing someone who, in this case, does not even ask for it, which is pretty rare in the Gospels. Almost always we see someone asking to be healed. But this just says they passed by a man, and the disciples asked him about it, and he turns around and says, "You know what? I'm just going to heal this dude." And so that, I think, plays into some of what happens a little bit later on in the verse. I won't get too far ahead, but it's a unique story for that sense, and it also has tons of symbolic meaning, which the Gospel of John is full of symbolism. It's one of the most symbol-rich and philosophical books in all of Scripture, for my money. If you were to ask me, I would say the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of the Gospel of John are two of the deepest and the richest books to speak to the logical mind and to the heart of humanity. And that's why I think they're two books that go hand in hand in a strange sort of way. But all right, let's dive in this morning to our first point. All right. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. Our first point is Jesus came to be the light in the darkness. Jesus came to be the light in the darkness. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned?" This is a binary question. Who sinned? This guy or his parents? Somebody had to sin for him to be like this. There is no generic question. Why is he blind? Let me ask you, Jesus, why do bad things happen to good people? There's none of that going on here. Who sinned? This guy or his parents? Somebody connected to him physically sinned. And Jesus answered, "It was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." So, in other words, Jesus is explaining to them that just because bad things happen to someone doesn't mean that they've brought it on themselves. And for us, we might say that we know that, but we also look around and we can see things that we think, I see what happened there. You did this and this happened to you. And maybe that's true. There are some things that we're going to bring on ourselves. If you end up in prison, it's very likely because you've done something wrong, okay? And so that's a bad thing that's happened because direct consequence of sin. But we can't always draw those conclusions. I don't feel like that's an issue that we at First Baptist Church struggle with, but it is worth mentioning that the disciples had this kind of binary view of the world. If something bad happens to you, it's because you sinned. However, I do think we have something on the opposite end of that spectrum that we deal with as a culture and maybe as a church somewhat, certainly as a Christian culture, and that is we view the lack of difficulty in our life as somehow we're doing things right, that God is blessing us, and that means that we're doing things right. We have the implied stamp of approval of God on our life because we have decent health, we have a nice home, we have jobs, our kids are good kids, because our life is pretty good. that validates who we are and what we do as a person. But that's not necessarily true. This is why in the opening I said Ecclesiastes goes with the book of John. Ecclesiastes goes with every book, in my opinion. But there we see pretty clearly, not even implied, directly stated, that sometimes, actually a lot of times, good people don't receive the physical manifestation of God's blessing. They don't receive wealth and health and prosperity, while on the other hand, wicked people sometimes do. And it's confusing to us, and we don't understand that. And so we might look at this from the opposite side and say, you know, why isn't God blessing this guy? Is he not sent? Is he not living for you? Were his parents or him not living for you? Is that why you don't choose to bless him with health? Is that why you're not answering his prayers for help? But Jesus said, you know, there are bigger things at work than your own physical comforts in the moment. And sometimes it's just as simple as, I want people to see God working in a difficulty. I want to see the light of God shine in a dark place. And so I need to have a dark place. And sometimes that dark place is a difficulty in my life or in your life. And we don't like that. We say, that's not fair. But we don't say that when God gives us good things that we don't deserve. We only say it when he gives us difficult things to handle and tests us and allows things to happen to us that we would prefer not. You know, so we can't pick and choose when we want God to be sovereign and ruler and king over our lives. We only want the good things to happen to us. But if God wants to do something amazing through our suffering and difficulty, then we're like, no thanks. But Jesus said that's what's happening here. This guy didn't sin. His parents didn't sin. He was born blind so that one day I could walk along this road and look at him and I could heal his blindness that is impossible to heal because he was never sighted in the first place. You can't heal what's broken. You can't reattach a limb that was never there to start with. And so Jesus heals a man. He gives a man sight that has never had sight before. And that's a miraculous work that is the likes of the world has never seen before. So, verse 4, he says, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And again here he says, he's drawing the comparison between light and dark, day and light, or light and darkness, and day and night, and I think blindness and sight. And all of these things are connected. In the scriptures, blindness is akin to darkness, is akin to night. All of those things are seen as bad. They're seen as a time when the enemy roams and works, when God's works are unseen, or God's presence is not there. But the day, the light, sight is all seen as positive things. They're all seen as gifts of God, and they are a way to describe the presence of God. And so Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and it is by light that we see. And all these things are connected. Jesus is taking someone trapped in physical darkness and bringing them into physical light. He is taking someone who's physically blind and giving them physical sight. And then he turns around and tells his disciples and says, I am the light of the world, which means I'm going to take this place, this world that is dark and blind, and I'm going to give it light and make it able to see. That's what I'm going to do. I'm doing it here in this person physically. I'm going to do it to the world spiritually. Well, what does he do? Does he just say, be healed? No, he does something really strange. Having said these things, in verse 6, he spat on the ground and made mud with saliva. Or some of your old translations say made with spittle. He made clay with spittle. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Siloam means sent. And he went and washed and came back seeing. Okay, so we've just discovered the cure for blindness. It's mud spit. It's spit clay. Whatever. No, of course not. So what in the world is going on here? There's a lot of theories. The couple of the most credible and maybe even tied together is one that the Jews, according to a couple commentaries I read, said that that the Jews viewed mud made with spit as sort of a salve, had medicinal qualities. And so Jesus is performing this task on the Sabbath day to demonstrate that you can heal on the Sabbath day. And that'll come up a little bit later on, as we see in the passage, to demonstrate that you can do medicine, you can do good things on the Sabbath day, and so that was part of why he did it. Thinking maybe, I don't know that, but possibly. The other thing that I tend to lean towards is that potentially Jesus is doing this not for himself, but for the man. In other words, can Jesus give sight to a blind person without making spit mud? Is it possible for the creator of the universe to give sight to a blind man without spitting on the ground and making mud pies and sticking them to his eyes? Is it possible? The obvious answer to that is a hilarious yes. Of course, it's possible. What's funny is the fact that he did use the mud. So, remember what I said about the Jews viewing this as medicinal, okay? Not only did he make a medicine for the man, but he also told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, which holds spiritual significance for the Jewish people. So it's my view that what Jesus is doing here is he is shoring up this man's weak faith. Now I say weak, not in relative terms, as in I would have a lot stronger faith, but weak in the sense of not strong enough to facilitate the healing itself. If you notice, I said earlier in the beginning of this story here that this is an unusual story. This man never asked to be healed. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, if you thought that somebody was standing right here beside you that could heal you of your blindness, wouldn't you say, "Hey, mister, do you mind healing me of my blindness?" So what that tells me is he didn't really think that Jesus could heal his blindness. Either A, he didn't know who he was, or B, he didn't believe the stories. And I can't think that he didn't know that Jesus was there, because everywhere that Jesus went, there was a crowd and there were people talking about Jesus. And maybe it so happened that this man just didn't know that Jesus was near. But either way, this man was not asking Jesus in faith to heal him. Remember recently we talked about the woman who pulled on Jesus' robe or touched Jesus' robe in order to receive healing. And that expressed massive amounts of faith, because she said, I don't even need Jesus to heal me. I just need to touch the hem of his robe. But here this man is not expressing any sort of personal faith. And so I think what Jesus is doing is overcoming, shoring up his personal faith by means that you and I would consider vulgar or low class. Things that we wouldn't do. We would say, no, you just need to have faith before Jesus can heal you. You need to rise up to the level that you deserve Jesus' healing by getting rid of all your fears and your worries and your concerns. And then once you get good enough, then Jesus can heal you. Once your faith is strong enough, Jesus can heal you. God, does that sound kind of sad? Does that kind of strike a chord with you? It does with me. I love the fact that Jesus does not wait on me to have perfect faith before he heals me. I love the fact that Jesus does not wait on me to believe 100% with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength on him before he will save me of my sins. He takes what weak, tiny faith that I have, faith that is much smaller than a mustard seed, I might add, sometimes almost microscopic, and he takes that little bit of faith. And so here, He's making it easy for the man to believe, I believe. He's treating him with medicine. And then he's treating him spiritually. Now go to the pool of Siloam, a place of spiritual significance, and wash the medicine out of your eyes. I think Jesus is stooping down to meet the man where he is and his level of faith. And I think that is a beautiful, beautiful story. Now, I could be wrong. It could be all about just the Sabbath day, and but either way, I think there is some truth to the idea that Jesus meets us where we are in our faith. And this is a great illustration of that to me. So the man went away and washed. And let's not bury the lead here, which we certainly did. He came back seeing. So he was healed. Ultimately, the man was healed. And so Jesus ends up accomplishing the miracle and shedding light on this situation and bringing sight to the blind and further confirming who he is as the Messiah and as the Son of God. All right, the second point, our text, our Sunday school material leaves out a ton of material here, and then goes back and explains what's in there. But we're going to read that, and we'll just walk through it, and that'll carry us through our next point. Jesus came into the world to do the works of God. So let's just walk through this. Verse 8 all the way through 33, really. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he," and others said, "No, but it's somebody just like him." But he kept saying, "No, it's me. I'm the man." So they said to him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know." So they brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. And now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Okay, remember going back to the original, kind of Jesus sticking it in the eye, no pun intended, of the Pharisees by making mud, by making medicine on the Sabbath. So the Pharisees again asked him and how he received his sight, and he told to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." And some of the Pharisees says, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? Since he has opened your eyes." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" And his parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but how he sees now we don't know, or who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's old enough to tell you. He'll speak for himself." And his parents said these things because they were scared of the Jews. The Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. So they were just hedging their bets there. Don't ask us. You talk to him. We know he's born blind. We know he's our son, but how this happened, we don't know. So therefore his parents said, "Go ask him." In verse 24, so for the second time they called the man who was born blind and said, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, though, I was blind, and now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he said, "I've told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't even know where he comes from." And the man answered, "Why, this is an amazing thing. You don't even know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind." Okay, so a couple things right here. One, they want to know where he comes from. we don't even know where he comes from, they said. And the reason they want to know where he comes from is so it doesn't matter where he comes from. Wherever he comes from, they can humanize him and make fun of him and belittle him, right? Because if you know where a man comes from, that makes him concrete, and you can begin to pick apart the details of his life. And boy, they would have had a field day with Jesus, born in Nazareth, or in where was he born? Bethlehem. And but raised in Nazareth. He was from Nazareth, a tiny little podunk speck of a town in Galilee. And so they would have had fun with that. Oh, he's from Nazareth. Oh, well, if he's from Nazareth, well, surely he must be a great prophet, because we know all those Nazarite prophets and stuff. Yeah. No, he's a good one. Yeah, all the prophets that come out of Nazareth, and all the big time Pharisees and the religious leaders have come out of Nazareth. What a great place to raise a man of God, a prophet, an important person. They would have had a field day with it. But what's ironic is that they thought that they could make fun of him and belittle him and poke holes in his prophecy and who he was by talking about where he was from, because where you're from, indicates, what kind of person you are, and maybe your power and your pedigree. But he was from heaven. Yeah, he's from heaven. Just this little place, you might have heard of it, called heaven. It's where God lives. So yeah, he does. They didn't know where he was from, but in a strange twist, where he was from is actually very important. And so this guy kind of turns on the sarcasm. Wow, this is amazing. He opened my eyes, and you don't even know where he's from. My goodness, wow, that's amazing. But we know, if anybody, God doesn't listen to sinners. So if this guy prays to God, and God opens my eyes, God doesn't listen to sinners. Man, golly, I don't know. And never since the world began has anyone opened the eyes of the blind. And that's true. There's not a story in the Old Testament of anybody receiving sight that was born blind. That's never happened. We have some people in the Old Testament stricken blind and then given their sight back. But nobody's ever been given sight, and certainly not anyone who is born blind. So this is an unprecedented miracle, is what he's saying. Oh man, what was I going to say? Anyway. Oh yeah, he was getting kind of sarcastic with them, wasn't he, about wanting them wanting to be his disciples. I thought that was funny. But anyway, okay, so we're at verse 33. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And that's true. Now let's just go ahead. I'll skip on to point number 3 in verse 34. All right, the final point, Jesus came to confront spiritual blindness, verse 34, 35, through the end of the text, through the end of the chapter, verse 41. And this is when Jesus is bringing home the illustration, so to speak. The whole point of him being born blind was so that Jesus could have this moment and explain to them that this healing of physical blindness is what people need spiritually. And so we'll pick up in verse 34. And they answered to him, "You are born in utter sin. Why would you teach us?" And they cast him out. So the Pharisees look at this guy and they say, "Who are you?" They still think that he was born in sin because of his blindness. In other words, that his blindness was a sign that his parents or he were sinning. And so they say, "Well, you were born in sin, therefore you can't teach us anything. We're the daggum Pharisees, man. We've been to seminary. Who are you? Who are you to teach us? We're not listening to you." And so they cast him out. They threw him out, and I think this means probably out of the synagogue. Jesus heard that they cast him out, and having found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, here's the part about faith. Remember, Jesus has already shored up his weak faith, and he comes back behind him and says, now do you believe? And he answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you've seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard him say these things, and they said to him, are we blind? Are we blind too, Jesus? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt or sin. But now that you say, we see, your guilt remains. So this goes kind of back to the idea that it's for the sick that I came into the world. And it is the sick who need a physician, and not the healthy, not the well. It is their inability, their unwillingness to admit to their blindness that causes them not to see. You know, men get a bad rap, and maybe we don't get a bad rap. Maybe it's deserved for not wanting to go to the doctor, right? And so I have this cough that I've been struggling with for a couple weeks now, and it's just like sinus drainage, and it's a pain in my neck, and it's just, ugh, I hate it. But I've not gone to the doctor. And you know what? I'm still coughing. And so there's a sense here in which Jesus is saying the same thing to these people that a lot of our wives say to us. You know, if you would admit that you are sick, then the doctor can heal you. He can give you medicine. He can treat you. But if you never admit that you're sick, you're not going to get better, right? That's what's happening here. These people are not admitting that they are blind, and therefore Jesus cannot heal them. Jesus cannot give them sight. They're not admitting that they're groping around in the darkness, so he cannot bring them into the light. They think they're in the light. Jesus said, the fact that you say, we see, means your guilt remains. You think you're fine, and therefore you're not going to seek any help. You're not going to seek the light. You're not going to seek remission of sin. You're not going to seek forgiveness. You're not going to seek a Savior because you think you're fine. You think you're saved because you are a Jew and you were born into the lineage, the birth lineage of Abraham. You think that saves you. It doesn't save you. You need to be born again. You need to come to the light. You need to eat the bread of life. You need to enter the door. You need to be a sheep under the good shepherd. All of these things Jesus is going to tell them. Here you need to seek a physician to heal your blindness. What does the man say? All I know, I was blind and now I see. And that's the basics of it. That's the basics of our faith. The who, what, where, when, why, how, we don't know. Nobody knew why this man was healed. And if Jesus had not been there to explain it, then nobody would have ever known why he was born blind. For what purpose? But we trust in the Lord, that the Lord's ways are good. And even when we can't see why or how, even when it looks like we're being mistreated, even when it looks like somebody's got it better, and yet I'm living righteous and they're not, we have to trust in the Lord. Because we probably won't ever get an explanation like this. Oh, let me tell you why that bad thing happened in your life. It's because X, Y, and Z. We won't know that. But Jesus will often help us with our faith and bolster our faith by doing things that help us get through the difficulty. Like the man in Mark's gospel, I think Mark 11, Lord, help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Jesus can do that. That's what he did for this man. He helped his unbelief, and then he asked him if he believed. What a beautiful picture of the gospel. Going after someone who didn't ask for help, healing them, giving them, boosting their faith, and then asking them if they had faith. Boy, that's the backwards picture of what we often think about the gospel. We often think about someone like the prodigal son coming to their senses and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and going out and searching for salvation. But in this case, it's the opposite. Jesus is walking by a man who was destined from birth to experience this healing right here. His whole life had been leading up to this moment when Jesus would walk by and see a blind man on the side of the road. He was born this way. He was sitting right here for this moment. He had no idea. He wasn't looking for Jesus. Jesus was looking for him. And he found him. And he shored up his faith. And then he saved him. And then he came behind. And then he healed him. And then he came behind and gave him a chance to express this solid, saving faith in the gospel. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Lord, I believe, he said. What a beautiful picture of the gospel.